Cattle shit on the ground. People walk in that shit. That shit then is brought back in their clothing and on their person and back into this country.
Senator Hanson, I will need you to move to take note of the minister's answer before you commence your contribution.
Okay, I move to take note of the minister's answer to this. Thank you.
You have the call.
Through the chair, I've got to say, the minister, Murray Watt, is so out of his depth with regards to this. He could have more to say on the opposition benches, but now that he's actually on the front bench and he has to respond to this in his ministerial role, he's so far out of his depth. He lives on the Gold Coast. He's possibly never even looked a cow on the face. He's never birthed a calf. He wouldn't have a clue what he's talking about. And talking about advice, we've all been through the COVID pandemic. He's listening to the experts. Well, experts have actually shut down our country, stop people from having jobs, and he thinks that he knows best what's right for this country. He actually said yesterday that it is the strongest response by any government. Well, again, he doesn't know what he's talking about. This has not been the strongest response that we've seen from any government to any biosecurity threat in our national history, as the minister said in his chamber yesterday. He's forgotten about the COVID-19 pandemic, where we actually closed the borders to protect our country from COVID, and apparently the minister has no knowledge of history in Australia's response to the influenza epidemic a century ago, when ships were quarantined, schools were closed and millions of vaccine doses were produced here. In his efforts to deflect attention from his misleading the Senate, he's misled us yet again. Foot-and-mouth vaccines stored in the United Kingdom cannot be used to inoculate animals in Australia until they are brought to Australia. Bring them now. That needs to be done. You know, he talks about there's apparently 1 million vaccine doses are not enough for, these are the figures, 74 million sheep, 26 million cattle, 2.6 million pigs and 1.5 million dairy cows in Australia. We knew how many doses of COVID we had in the country. Why don't we know how many vaccines we had for the animals? Why isn't he telling us that? Oh, for security reasons. Why? I don't understand security reasons here, because he doesn't want to be seen that he's got such a minimum amount of vaccines for the amount of cattle and sheep and pigs that we have in this country, because we've got nowhere near the vaccines needed to protect us. Let me also tell you that if this gets out, we actually have over 24 million feral pigs in Australia. 24 million. Probably none of you know this either, that pigs are virus factories. When it comes to foot and mouth disease, they produce 3,000 times the quantity of the virus than a cow does. They're everywhere. National parks. You shut the national parks down, you haven't culled them. You've done nothing about the pigs. If the virus gets in the pigs, you've actually got a real problem in this country. Then you've got the camels. We actually have over 1 million feral camels in Australia. Then we have about 2.3 million goats, feral goats, and we've got about 2 million wild deer. All these can be carriers of it, and yet you're not talking about this. This is an important matter. The minister also tells the chamber that we are actually he's got support from these industries. The NFF, really, do they really support and speak on behalf of a lot of these farmers? I don't think so. I don't think so. They don't. And I'll also tell you another thing too. I just got off speaking with there's a dairy here in Australia, and they are really concerned. This is a dairy industry, a corporation in Australia, who is actually very concerned about it. They said if it gets into the dairy cows, it's worse than it can be for cattle, because they will not be able to put dairy cattle onto their properties for 3 years if it gets into the dairy herd. Now, dairy cattle are very hard to breed the cattle that we need for the production of milk that we get from them, so it takes a lot longer. You have no idea of the damage that can be done to this country if we get foot and mouth in here. Also, you think of the export. We are regarded as clean and green. If we get it in here, Japan and those other countries won't take our produce. We'll lose the dairy industry, the export of meat, but then that's right up your alley. It's right up the Greens' alley and probably the Labor Party too. The fact is that you actually want to...
Yes, point of order.
Just direct the Senator to direct her remarks through the chair. I know there's been a few opportunities this week for people to shout "you" across the chamber. I don't think that's appropriate in this circumstance.
Senator Hanson, just please take note that your comments come through the chair.
Sorry, Deputy President, but my response has been nothing other than referring to what is before us on this issue. Right? So anyway, they didn't like the fact that I'm referring to the Greens and the Labor Party because their policy is they haven't been supporters of the agricultural industry. Never. They haven't supported it. It's been One Nation, I've got to say the Coalition and the National Party that have been really fought for the agricultural industry in this country. If it was up to the other side and this chamber, they would shut down our agricultural industry. They want to see cows and the beef cattle destroyed in this nation. They want to see emissions reduced, whichever way it comes about, because it's going to make them look good. Well, you're going to destroy our food security. This is a pathetic response from you, and I'm sick of hearing, but what did you do about it? You didn't speak about this. You know, what a ridiculous response that is. You're in government now, and all you can do is throw it back with you. What did you do? What did you do? You know, it's like when I move into a house, the electricity bill wasn't paid. Well, you know what? I've got to pay the bill if I want the electricity on, and I just go and do it. So it's got nothing to do with it, blaming the other side because of their response to it. And I'll tell you another thing also. You say foot and mouth is around the rest of the world. That may be the case. But Bali is totally different to other countries because cattle roam the streets. Cattle shit on the ground. People walk in that shit. That shit then is brought back in their clothing and on their person and back into this country. There is a hell of a difference with what happens in Bali, so close to us. Bali is one of our biggest tourist destinations for Australians. Yes, it does need to be considered and looked at on the grounds of the damage it can do to this country. And the Minister says yesterday, well, if it gets into Australia, right? Well, then we'll deal with it at the time. That's going to be too late. Once it gets in here, we've lost our biosecurity forever. We will not be able to eradicate it. You can't just say, well, we'll compensate the farmers, because if that's your answer, that's ridiculous. Because the Australian people have had a gutful of actually picking up the pieces with their tax dollars and compensation and remuneration paid to so many people because of our bloody mistakes that are made in this place. If we can close the borders to the COVID, then we can close the borders to this until it is eradicated. Yes, by all means, we are fully supportive of defending and stopping it from coming into Australia. But we also must ensure that it doesn't get here and it can be brought in very easily. Actually, travellers can carry it up their nose, their nostrils, for a period of about 26 to 28 hours. So that can be brought in the country that way. What is the problem with closing the borders when we did it so easily for COVID? Why not for this? Why not till it is eradicated or under control in Indonesia for the short period of time? Another thing I must question is, why aren't we actually giving heavier fines at airports? That people bringing in this produce into the country, they make the excuses, oh, I couldn't read English, me don't understand, no English. And that we just wipe it and we give them a chip, oh, well, that's okay. Oh, no, my wife packed the suitcase. I didn't know what was in it. And until we actually get serious about border security and start charging these people and really being hard on this matter, nothing's going to change, and we are taken like bloody fools and idiots that they can do and say whatever they want to do and say, and we just accept it. The other side, the Labor and the Greens, have no idea how serious this issue is. It is so important. It will destroy a lot of our farming sector, the cattle, the industry that we have. And I'd just like to say, if we're propping up Indonesia with this, I hope it is coming out of the foreign aid that we give them. The foreign aid was well over 650 million. It was about 650 million. It could have been reduced to about 400 million. I'm not sure. But anyway, I hope this is coming out of the foreign aid that we give to Indonesia and not another handout to them. But I'd like to say that One Nation does support this, and you know we probably have been cut back in our staff, of course, saving monies and everything like that. You know, $1.5 million to save monies to the taxpayer, but you've just given $100 million to Ukraine. You've given $50 million to Sri Lanka. You've given money to the South Pacific. So for us to actually do our jobs, it's extremely hard for One Nation to do our.
Hanson. Senator Namatjinja Price.